What's going on, everybody? Welcome to PFF's live NFL pregame show here at the beautiful Western and Southern studios. We are so glad that you are here hanging out with us as we get you ready for week 2 in the NFL. Trevor Sikkema, Sam Monson, Ian Hartitz, Eric Geyer. We're going to give you guys all the information that you could possibly need coming up over the next hour and a half. Whether it's fantasy, whether it's betting, whether it's the biggest storylines, whatever it is, we promise we got you covered. Fellas, we're here in week 2. We waited so long for week 1, and I'm just going to let you know, it felt like overload for me. As much as I wanted to try to take in everything, it felt like I couldn't. There was so much going on, but when you look at what happened in week 1, when you think about it, what were some of your biggest takeaways, the stuff that you remember going into this week?
A couple of the teams that everybody wrote off all offseason, New Orleans, Pittsburgh, actually showed up, and they've been really good for a really long period of time, for a reason that went beyond just having a great quarterback. You know, Drew Brees and Ben Roethlisberger, obviously only one of those guys still there, but there's a lot of reasons that those two teams are still being good.
Is one still there? I feel like last week, Big
I'm
Ben.
not dead yet.
Yeah, lowest graded quarterback in our system.
The shell have been.
When is it?
No. Now it's the old Ben is gone though. This is new Ben. It's
rebirth.
Correct, right?
Yeah.
He's the Renaissance man, right? Ian, what about you?
For me, we look in the box score, we see one thing. We watch the games, and it's sometimes another. Like, Kyler Murray just blew out absolutely both of these things, and I thought he looked like the best player. You know, with all due respect to Patrick Mahomes, I know he has that every week, but I thought Kyler was the most impressive guy of week 1. Had a week-high 6 big-time throws. I don't even think that did him justice. Like, they apparently, were trying to keep a defender on him in the run game every play. I didn't see the guy. Just, might need to slow down Kyler. So, excited to see if he can keep this up all season, because he really did last year before that shoulder injury.
Could be a hell of a year for Kyler. And I know a lot of people have been waiting for this, right? I mean, when he got drafted to the Arizona Cardinals, it was Cliff Kingsbury, Kyler Murray. Then they eventually get DeAndre Hopkins. Like, this is supposed to be the formula. And, man, I felt like we saw it last week, no doubt. Eric, what about you?
The Wests were both 4-0, right? And you look at last week, there were some divisions that you're like, how many wins is going to win this division? Like the AFC South, that's a pretty good question. It's going to take 12, 13 wins to win these Western divisions, and that's going to make for a lot of good football. Was very impressed.
Yeah, sometimes that question can be impressed and not as impressed. Like you said, the AFC South, it's, oh boy, how many wins is going to win this division? But then the other ones, both the AFC and the NFC.
The Cardinals had a really good performance. The question after this week is going to be, was that performance because of how bad Tennessee was and how bad that division was in general?
You're saying Chandler Jones won't get 5 sacks every week? Hater.
Probably not.
I believe if he does, I did look this up before, and I looked at PFF's database. Of course, you can only exclusively get it there. I believe that would be, in fact, an NFL record if he got 5 every single week.
Yeah, sure.
Might have to get the stats people to check on that, but I do think that he's at least close in that regard. So Chandler Jones, he is one of the guys who was our top graded players from over the week. Also on the list, you're going to see the regular cast of names. You're going to see Tom Brady. You're going to see Tyreek Hill. That really strong Cleveland Browns offensive line. I mean, outside of those guys, or maybe it's a couple of those guys that you want to talk about, who were some of the players individually that just really stood out to you? Some performances that you really want to take note of?
I was massively impressed by Teddy Bridgewater, a quarterback.
Here we go.
I didn't think he should get the job. I didn't think either of those guys was a great option at quarterback. But if you're going into the season in the division that they're in, knowing you're in that spot, give it to the guy with higher upside. Throw Drew Lock out there. Maybe there's a jump to be had, or at least he can give you some big plays that'll help offset that. But Bridgewater showed why they gave him the job, and he's proven them right. Incredible accuracy, had the lowest rate of uncatchable passes in the NFL, below 6%. Trevor Lawrence was about 30 at the other end of the spectrum. So Bridgewater was efficient, still didn't make a ton of big plays, one big-time throw, but that is the level of efficiency. If he plays at that level every week, they'll win a lot of games.
They're a weird paradox where they might very well make the playoffs without being favored in any of their division games, right? Like, because you look at the Raiders, I think, are superior to them at the position. Obviously, the Chargers and the Chiefs are. But then their off-division, sort of schedule is one of the easiest in all of football. So it's setting up interestingly for Denver here. Bridgewater, clearly the guy that Fangio wants not to screw it up, and he did very well at that week 1.
We thought Drew Lock was going to win the job just for the overall upside, but to see Teddy go in there, same drive, stiff-arm defenders away, extending plays, hit KJ Hamler in the chest on a potential 50-yard touchdown. Unfortunately, it wasn't caught, but now he gets the dream matchup, the Jaguars. So expecting big things from him this week.
And he got the nod afterwards from Von Miller, right? Didn't he say on Twitter, or he said, hey, I haven't felt that since 18 was there. Obviously, that's Peyton freaking Manning.
There's a little video clip about Teddy going down the sideline, giving everyone the little pep talk, and Von Miller was saying, look, that stuff matters. You might not think it does, but it does, and that is the kind of thing. It's not going to make the difference between Teddy Bridgewater, being the quarterback and not being the quarterback. But if he's there, it's a little percentage point of an edge, right? People are going to want to play for Teddy Bridgewater.
Another small leadership moment, if you will.
Let's go. The
Justin
unquantifiable.
Herbert taking the game ball, waiting all the way till the end until coach is done giving it away and says, Coach, we got one more. Here you go. My goodness, I know we talked about Herbert and the potential for him to regress, mostly because it's hard to be as good as he was in 2020. But man, through 1 week, it helps when you have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams to go up and get it. But he still looks like the real deal once again.
Yeah, very interesting. We'll say this on the Darius part as well, but like the Chargers were the second most contested team in the NFL on catches last week. It seems like Herbert sort of defying statistics constantly in his career. Third down rates last week was also a big part of it. We'll see how long it can last, but as of now, it's really entertaining.
I know for me personally, I was very impressed with the 2 rookie offensive tackles that we talked so much about over the offseason, Rashawn Slater and Penei Sewell. Penei Sewell is getting a lot of flack playing on the right side of the line. He was struggling a little bit because normally he's been a left tackle. He plays left tackle for Detroit, plays 92 snaps, and was the highest graded offensive tackle for rookies. Right behind him, though, Rashawn Slater. He looked fantastic as well. Both of these guys, game 1, Sewell played 92 snaps, Slater played 81. So it's not like these guys, small sample size, played really well. They played a lot. And they played really, really well. So this was huge. That was a big takeaway for me, is that, some of the rookies, it's always going to be up and down. But when it came to these 2 players that we said, surefire guys, right? Draft them, start them at left tackle right away, which I do think we do a little too much of that. We just go, oh yeah, go play franchise left tackle against these monster pass rushers. I don't think everybody's built to do it. These guys clearly are. And
it's certainly better than saying, oh, go play right tackle when you've only ever been a left tackle.
Right.
At least now he's back in his natural position, and the Lions, you would think, have to be exhaling a lot after that week 1, given how badly he'd been struggling on the right side. Okay, it's a good problem to have now. They've got a couple of good left tackles, but it's better than having one good left tackle and what looks like a disaster on the right side.
You mentioned those AFC, NFC West teams playing so well. And I mean, was it just top to bottom? I mean, you were impressed with all of them. Were there a couple where you went, okay, yeah, 1-0, but it might be a little fool's gold?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like they were expected to win every game. I mean, Los Angeles Chargers were underdogs in Washington. Obviously, the Raiders were underdogs at home to Baltimore. You had Kansas City, who was kind of outplayed. Cleveland had a top 5 grade in the history of our system, single game grade to lose a game.
Yeah,
so they
can't believe it.
They took the best punch there. And as well as, going on the road in the Denver Broncos only being a couple points favored to New York. Like, there was a lot of impressiveness there. And it bodes well for the future. Like, I mean, all these teams are going to need to be on their best behavior all season if they're going to win the division or make the playoffs. You and I talked about this with Anthony Tresh on the College Football Live show, where, you have to take things as they are, not necessarily as you want them to be, as you see the best of it. And I do feel like we all collectively, not just at this table, but kind of everybody in the media, was really feeding into the NFC West. And it was probably more likely than not that not all of these teams were going to be fantastic. But at least it's really cool to see it right out of the gate, everybody coming out guns blazing. Yep.
Yeah, how about that Seahawks game? They finally kind of played a normal game.
Look at that.
We control
Proud of
it,
them.
get the win. Hopefully we just see a little bit more volume. Hey, it worked for them, but 23 pass attempts for Russ, only 5 targets.
He had the
each for
over in
Lockett
that
and
game.
Metcalf.
Pretty pissed off after a first quarter, which they moved the ball, and then they basically put it on cruise control after.
Is it spoken for somebody who had the over?
Maybe.
And the one team in that division that everyone would have been the most cautious about, Arizona, looked the best of any of them.
Yeah.
Like Arizona went out there, looked phenomenal week 1.
Man, that was fun to watch. So you mentioned the Seattle Seahawks, and there's a couple of other teams that we have on our power rankings here, which we're going to show you in a second. At the very top, it's what you would expect. It's Tampa Bay, it's Kansas City, but we also have the Saints, the Seahawks right there, and then of course we have a couple of teams that are tied to clog up things within the top 10. But guys, when you look at that power ranking right there, are there teams either at the top of the list or maybe not on the list at all right now that surprise you either way?
I think given how close Cleveland came to beating Kansas City, and honestly the fact that they didn't was more down to themselves, weird turnovers, than it was Kansas City necessarily righting the ship and coming over. I would expect Cleveland to be on that, and I think they will be in a matter of time. They're going to roll this season.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one I think that's glaring here. As I said, they graded extremely well in the game against the Chiefs. The issue is last year was kind of fluky in a lot of ways. In some ways, you could say a lot of their games were messed up by weather, but they were an 11-5 team that had a negative point differential, so that was going to stunt their prior a little bit. And it was some of those self-inflicted errors. But I would imagine after being almost 2 touchdown favorites this week against Houston, they take care of business there. They'll probably be in the top 10, especially with teams that we're sort of worried about, the Buffalo Bills, the Baltimore Ravens, the Green Bay Packers. If they were to slip up again, obviously a spot for Cleveland.
So who is in the most trouble, right? I mean, like of those teams that maybe dropped a little bit, aren't as high on the list, or dropped the game in reality, like who's the most in trouble?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at Green Bay, Buffalo, Tennessee, you threw in there as well, I think are a good candidate, and then Baltimore. A couple of those teams have got tough Week 2 matchups. Green Bay, you would expect to bounce back despite your suggestion that they might not win a playoff game.
Well,
I wouldn't be taking victory laps just yet. That's all I'm saying.
But
the Lions.
I just said they weren't going to be as good.
Take the AFC South, though. You have Indianapolis's road underdogs today. Home underdogs today. Tennessee is almost a touchdown underdog to Seattle. If Seattle plays a normal game, they will lose. 0-2 against 0-2 next week. Yeah. 2 of the favorites in that division playing next week.
And that's why I don't think that you would highlight either of those teams as being in the most trouble, because that division is going to give them some slack. Baltimore, though, in the AFC North could be in a hole pretty quickly.
Right.
They are probably going to be 0-2 again when they lose to Kansas City. The AFC North is going to require some wins to get towards the top. And if you look at their run-in, their final 7 games, it's Pittsburgh twice, Cleveland twice, the Rams, Green Bay, and like Cincinnati was the one gimme, and Cincinnati might actually be okay. Like they might have a final 7 run-in that's just a nightmare. If
you're basically saying to bet the Browns to win the division, because if you look at the market does not believe in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was going off at like 4-1 to win the division. After last week, they generated a 1-game lead on both Baltimore and Cincinnati, or Baltimore-Cleveland. They still only are 3-1 to win that division. So maybe it's Pittsburgh if you actually believe in them. Right. The market does not. You
have quite the talent, Eric, for hearing something that somebody is saying and going, here's where I see the bet. And you're just able to weed it out of people and get to that. There's a lot of fantasy football action that we want to talk about. Ian, I'm going to tee you up on this because there's a lot of big ad drops that we do have to talk about. But before we get to that, got to talk to the people about our friends over at Western and Southern. They are sponsoring this show, and they are here to get you ready for all of the financial planning that you need. We're going to get your lineups ready. They're going to get your financial goals ready, whether it's retirement, life insurance, investment solutions, whatever it is. They are going to have you prepared on game day. Best part is everything is very personal. So you talk to them about exactly what your goals are, what you're trying to meet, and they can even help you figure those out yourself. You can do so by getting started over at westernsouthern.com. All right, Ian. Teeing you up here. This is your time to shine. Fantasy football, it's in full swing now. We don't have the who to draft articles, but now it's all about how you manage the team, how you can win the league from here on out. So after you took a look at some of the usage, maybe not usage, that happened in week 1, Who are some big-time ad drop players that you want to talk about this week?
And that is what it's all about most of the time. We always say in fantasy, chase volume, not talent. If you're a professional football player, you're talented. All these guys are. Ultimately, got to find the guys that are getting more opportunities than others. And with that said, Elijah Mitchell. Everyone is now a huge fan of this guy. We were not expecting him to be the 49ers RB1. That is now what we have seen after the Mostert injury. So Trey Sermon will be active today. But hey, Mitchell, you go for over 100 yards. You look pretty good doing so. We can now fire him up safely as an upside RB3. Cool it just a little bit. I do think Sermon's going to make this into more of a 1A, 1B committee. But either way, when you have a Shanahan running back looking at double-digit touches per game, we're feeling good about that. Kenyon Drake is a popular ad because Josh Jacobs is out. Credit to him for toughing it through that Monday night game. But Kenyon Drake, we're now looking, tough matchup, but 15 to 20 combined carries and targets, tough to bust on that. And then finally, guys, we saw the Houston-Jacksonville game. I think my biggest takeaway from that is we need to play everyone possible against this Jaguars defense. So Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler with no Jerry Jeudy. It sucks that Judy's out. I was so waiting for him to just.
Could be a lot worse, though.
Could be a lot worse. He's got those Gumby ankles. He'll be back 4 to 6 weeks, hopefully. But Hamler and Patrick, I think, can also give you just some nice 1 week upside for those looking for a final fill. And on the other side of things, Mike Gesicki. Great real-life talent, but they use him as a wide receiver, and they just added Jalen Waddle. Will Fuller won't be there this week, but basically, Durham Smythe was playing ahead of Gesicki. Again, it's just about chasing the talent, chasing the opportunity. Gesicki doesn't have much of it right now. And the same goes for Phillip Lindsay and Zach Moss. These are guys in multi-back committees, and we can usually live with 2 backs in fantasy land. There's only so many Christian McCaffreys out there, but for Moss, he was inactive last week. Singletary is ahead of him, maybe Matt Breida. And for Lindsay, I don't want to say fluke too much with the Texans, but come on, guys. There's 4 dudes involved there. I don't want to start any of them.
So I want to open it up a little bit to a couple of those points because I know that you guys have some talking points on that. But where I want to start is with the Denver Broncos because this offseason, I think that we talked a lot about the Denver Broncos and we said, okay, we like Fangio there. We like, even though the defense is not nearly as talented as it maybe could have been, it's a really strong lineup, I think, top to bottom. The big thing we were worried about was what? Passing game, uncertainty at quarterback, and now we kind of have that certainty with Teddy Bridgewater. Like you said, had a little bit of reservations. Maybe we thought Drew Lock was the guy, but Ian's over here talking about KJ Hamler, Tim Patrick. Yeah. And Courtland Sutton didn't even play that well last week. And now, do we need to take that weakness away from what we see with the Broncos?
When you look, the situation was always that those receivers in Denver across the board were incredible. It's like if they just had a quarterback that could take advantage of them, at least in week 1, Teddy Bridgewater looks like he's capable of doing that. But we're not talking about Jerry Jeudy's out, and the options to replace him are Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler, who would be like starters on half the teams in the NFL. KJ Hamler has shown in preseason and in week 1 that guy is going to have like a 50-yard touchdown opportunity most games. Now, whether he'll catch every one of them is a different question.
Okay, all right, okay.
That guy's a big play waiting to happen. And then Tim Patrick is just a genuinely quality top-level receiver like across the board.
He's the best number 4 wide receiver in the NFL. With all due respect to Gabriel Davis and Auden Tate.
I will not stand for KJ Hamler slander. I'm just letting you know. Throughout this show, from start to finish, week 1 to week 17.
I'm just saying, sometimes he doesn't always catch the ball. It's not good.
Drops, we don't got to worry about drops, right?
Drops don't matter.
There we go. There we go, baby. But you do. You're right. You got to put your 2 hands together. Okay, let's get into what's on focus, what we're talking about today. Let's get into some deep dives of these previews. The first game that I want to talk about, Dallas Cowboys, Los Angeles Chargers. This one's got a big-time quarterback matchup. We focused a lot on quarterbacks last week. We're starting off with that same kind of feel here this week. Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert. 2 guys that people have MVP aspirations throughout their career, right? And for good reason from what they put out there on tape. They go up against each other here. Sam, what do you think is going to be the deciding factor? What are you looking forward to?
I'm really interested to see, does Dallas stick with the same game plan from week 1, right? Since the start of last year, this has been the Dak Prescott show. It's just been, here are the keys, make magic happen. We're leaving it all up to you. And, week 1, it was the same thing. They didn't want to run the ball into the teeth of Vita Vea, just absolutely destroying people up front. And that was the right call. They should not have run the ball into that. It was a buzzsaw. They would have been absolutely murdered. They put the ball in Dak's hands and let him execute the game plan. Now, does that still hold against the Chargers? They don't have a Vita Vea right up front. They have a softer interior. If you're going to run the ball, this is a better opportunity to do it. On the other hand, Dak's been doing pretty well.
Yeah, I was very happy with Mike McCarthy looking at a game, or Kellen Moore looking at a game. Dak Prescott checked into a lot of those, but in a game where they were 10-point underdogs basically, and went into the game from the jump thinking we're down by 10 points, right? To me, that shows a sign. That's a sign of optimism for me. Not using Zeke when because he has all that money. I think again that's a sign of optimism for me. The issue that I have in this game is all the injuries, right? You have DeMarcus Lawrence out. You have La'el Collins out. You have Michael Gallup out. We heard reports this morning that Micah Parsons is going to play defensive end, which is like kind of cool, but also like
I mean, he played at Penn State, but we thought he was going to be this linebacker
hybrid. We thought he was going to be a linebacker,
right.
And that puts Jalen Smith out there. That puts Leighton Vander Esch out there, guys who have struggled the last few years. So again, I understand where this number's at. It got up to 3.5. It's now kind of settling in at 3. I do think the Chargers should be favored here, even if they don't have the best home field advantage in the world.
Ian, the not having Vita Vea, able to use Zeke a little bit more, music to your ears, right?
Well, Eric mentioned it briefly. Like Kellen Moore actually came out during the week and said he called 28 runs in this game. Dak just checked, understandably, 12 of them back to passes. So not quite seeing the same sort of buzzsaw. All due respect to Joey Bosa and Derwin James. My biggest takeaway from last week was the Cowboys can score 30 on anyone, and anyone can score 30 on the Cowboys. So, like Eric wants to relate everything back to the bet. Over under 55, guys. I know it's high, but like, who's holding either team in this under 30?
Well, I think the Chargers only scored 20 against Washington, a team that gave up about 30 points to the Giants just a couple days ago. So I do wonder that the Chargers thing, and this was more of a Phillip Rivers issue than it will be a Herbert issue. But I do think the Chargers like to lengthen the games, maybe a way to put it, where they might be the team that contributes to this game going under the total, and not so much Dallas's pace and things like that. But it very, very encouraging again that Dak is sort of like woke to this fact of like me throwing the football is going to be what wins us football games. I think that, and the fact that Dallas, having given him that contract, is willing to give him that freedom.
To your point of, understanding that you're essentially a 10-point dog and you're going to need to put up points, I think at this point, Dallas is going into every game saying, the defense is putting up 30. Your starting target is 31, and let's see how we go.
And that's awesome, right? Like there were games back when you would be like, just let the other team score at the end, and it's like, oh no, this is offensive to our defense. It's like, no, the defense knows when they go to bed at night that they're not very good. Dallas going into these games with a clear head is I think important, and even though they lost week 1. I think and even though McCarthy has had his moments of wokeness before and he's retreated, I think that this is a fairly good omen for them. And granted, you look at their schedule. They had a tough week 1 game. They have a tough week 2 game. Dallas' schedule after this is pretty cakewalky.
So the Bucs don't. We're not talking about the Bucs here, but I wanted to mention this because you set the table, and Sam, you had a reaction there about Dallas thinking they were down 10 to start the game. Is that how you have to play the Chiefs, the Bucs? Is that just how it has to happen? Did Dallas basically, I don't want to say set the blueprint, because it's not like no team has done this before, but to see them pass as much as they did, to see them be as aggressive as they were, is that just what teams are going to have to do?
Look at how the Browns acted. They went for the first 4th and medium the other day.
Yeah.
They went for 2 when the Chiefs gave them a 1-yard advantage on that. They were very much playing as if this was the last meal they're ever going to eat, right?
They went for 2 after the first touchdown.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how you have to play. And of course, when these teams are great, like Tampa is and like Kansas City is, that first mistake you make, they take advantage of it. And you almost have to play a perfect game. But you can't play a perfect game if you are donking decisions from a coaching perspective. And good on Dallas and good on Cleveland for never doing that last week.
Not every team is equipped to do that, but the Cowboys have Dak Prescott. They've got a trio of elite wide receivers. You have the horses to be able to go toe-to-toe with Kansas City. And in an ideal world, you would like to have a defense that could hold up its end of the bargain, but you don't. So you can't just go into your shell and blame it on the defense. You've got to say, well, we have to overcome that, at which point
the goal is to win games. The goal is not to cover your ass by blaming somebody else.
Right.
And that's, to me, I think that Dallas showed in week 1. Again, famous last words because they've reverted at times, but they showed in week 1 that they are willing to win, to try their best to win football games, to increase that probability, and they're using the horse that they have, which is Dak Prescott. And it's smart because you're paying him all that money.
Any concerns about Dak's arm strength? He got the ball where it needed to go and everything, but that was kind of a talking point after Thursday night. Is he fully back with his shoulder? I don't know that it matters. He's never exactly been the guy that we're like wondering if he has the strongest arm in the league anyway. But Sam, I guess I was wondering your thoughts after rewatching.
I think that's a big part of it, right? You've never looked at Dak Prescott when he's 100% healthy and gone, that guy has an absolute cannon. Yeah. It's not a Justin Herbert type of arm. It doesn't wow you when the ball comes out, but it usually gets where it's supposed to go. Very rarely does it die on him, and I think we saw that there. There was one throw that was a little bit underthrown and looked ugly. The rest of it, it didn't look like it had a ton of zip, but it got.
You have to monitor that this year, though, right? It's a Cam Newton situation where, like 2018, he's playing great, distributing the ball, and then halfway through the year, you're like, God, his arm died, and you have to monitor that from a DFS and gambling perspective.
They've kept him on a pitch count, like throughout training camp. He hasn't had a length of time of like throwing 100%. It probably will get a bit stronger over the next few weeks.
Didn't have a pinch count last week.
Right.
they let him go and throw all 9 innings, and they even went to extras. So this line started at 3 favoring the Chargers. I think it moved to 3.5 at one point. Now it's kind of settled more at 3. Is that the correct area that you think it should have landed on, Eric?
Yeah, I think so. I think if there's anything, there's value on Dallas every time it flips up to plus 3.5, right? I think this game could play to a field goal. We are talking about the Chargers after all. Like these games are close.
Right.
These games are weird.
Even without Phillip Rivers, you think that's still just going to be the case?
I mean, last season the Chargers didn't play a normal game either. I remember the game where they faced the Falcons, and it was like, it was 2 Falcons teams playing at once. So like I think like it was. If you can get on a side of a field goal, if you're betting on a Chargers game to land on a field goal difference, you're probably doing okay. And so I think anytime it flips up to plus 3.5 with Dallas, you take it.
All right, that's fair. Let's talk about Texans-Browns next. The Texans, folks, are not going to be winless this season. For as much as people thought we would have another and whatever team, 17, I'm still protesting it a little bit. Texans got it the first victory. And granted, it was an AFC South matchup, and it was against Urban Meyer in his first game as a head coach with Jacksonville. So I think there are all sorts of things that you could say, but still, I think we got to give the Texans credit for coming out winning in week 1 after the entire whirlwind of an offseason they had for a lot of things, even outside of Deshaun Watson. So when you look at this matchup, is Houston poised to upset? I can't even get done with it without laughing.
No, it's not. I think you have to acknowledge that, look, this might say more about Jacksonville in week 1 than it does about Houston. The Jags look terrible. Trevor Lawrence kept throwing the ball to defenders. This was bad. They all of a sudden look like they're the team in trouble. But I think it says something about Tyrod Taylor, who was a functionally pretty good quarterback as a starter in Buffalo for 3 straight years. 3 straight years of the PFF grade above 75, between 15 to 12 in the PFF rankings each one of those years. And then Buffalo reasonably decided, you know what, this is okay, but we want better. We want to shoot for the moon. We want to find the Josh Allen and his 90-plus grade season.
People forget that Tyrod was the first quarterback to take Buffalo to the playoffs. In this millennium. Right? So like he is actually like a guy that can get you on the green.
So I don't think you can blame Buffalo for wanting to find something better and a higher upside, and they nailed it. So credit to them. But Tyrod Taylor then went to Cleveland, where he looked terrible and then got concussed.
That was
and knocked out of the game.
Hugh Jackson's fault.
Very reasonable point.
There you go.
Then went to the Chargers, where a doctor punctured his lung, giving him a painkiller to play through the broken ribs he already had. This guy is a functionally good quarterback, and he showed it again this week.
And how about his number 1 receiver real quick, Brandon Cooks, someone that got to play with Brady, Breeze, Watson, briefly the good version of Jared Goff. And he was out there last week, not 1, but 2 really great contested downfield catches. I mean, I know, especially from fantasy perspective, we looked at this offense in the preseason, and the answer just seemed like no to everyone involved. But if Tyrod can play even 90% that well, Brandon Cooks is going to have a
1,300-yard year, and we're not going to notice because he's going to be playing for Houston, just like last season, right? Like we're not going to notice. You talk about contested catches. Houston, we gave them a lot of flack this offseason. I think understandably so. The culture, it was all weird.
They earned it. They earned the flack.
They earned it. But last week, they did a lot of smart things. They were a top 5 team in early down play action rate. They were a top 5 team in terms of negotiating box counts, making the other team play up on you. And then they were one of the top 5 teams in avoiding contested targets last week, which means they're scheming guys open, or the Jags just suck and can't get within a yard of any receiver. But for now, I'm going to at least give them a little bit of credit in the sense that, talent, some of these things in the NFL requires talent. Some of them don't. And there are teams like Tennessee last week, like Minnesota last week, like Atlanta, that flunked all the tests in things that don't require talent. Houston doesn't have a lot of talent, but they at least aced the part of the test where talent didn't matter last week.
You mentioned this a little bit, but the Browns played extremely well against Kansas City. You said that was a top 5 graded performance in a loss, right?
Yeah, fifth highest grade in a loss since the PFF era. So absolutely, they outgraded the Chiefs by something like 14, 15 points in our grading system. And I think that checks, right? I think like you look at that game and they really did play extremely well. The margins are thin though, and you look at one fumble, a botched punt, a long touchdown to Tyreek Hill, and then an interception at the end was enough to kill them. But they mostly played a great game, and I think if they play that well this week, it's going to be hard. I'm not saying that Houston can't cover this, and I think Tyrod is a very, Tyrod might be the kind of quarterback where he's a lot like Bridgewater, where they underestimate him every game. So if you bet on him every single game, you cover a lot of numbers, but I don't think he can win this game.
I mean, if the Browns play that well, let's just say they play that well for the full regular season slate. I mean, we talking what? 3 losses max?
Yeah,
4
I mean,
losses?
they'll probably lose to maybe the Ravens once, the Steelers once, maybe. But yeah, it's not going to be that many.
Right.
And they have a third-place schedule because of the weirdness of last season. So they actually have a nice slate there. They're going to put pressure on the Chiefs for that 1 seed.
That's assuming a team like Baltimore is healthy that late in the season.
Right.
Like they could get lucky there as well. This is an interesting test for Cleveland because, I mean, when was the last time Cleveland was like 12-point favorites over anybody? Like, they have now changed. They're not the Browns anymore. This is a contending team. Yeah. Okay, they fell at the last hurdle against Kansas City, but right up until that last hurdle, they were like taking it to one of the Super Bowl favorites and saying, we are here in January. These are the games where that's built on, though, where you're massive favorites against Houston. You're supposed to go out there and just stomp them. Can you do that?
I believe they are the team with the longest streak since division titles. 1989, Bernie Kosar was the quarterback.
Well, the division wasn't the same. It's the Central the last time
there were 6 teams in it at one point. The Browns didn't even exist for 3 years. I mean, there's a lot of interesting history here. But you're right. Like, I'd have to go back and look. It's probably like the 80s since they've been double-digit favorites in a game.
I was not alive. I'm looking forward to seeing what this offense looks like in a smash spot here because, the Vikings, and it's Stefanski offense, so you spring it from that. We've seen games over the past 2 years where when they know they can win, like Kirk Cousins will throw the ball 12 times or whatever. Is that going to be Baker in spots like this, or are they going to let him open it up? Because to me, that's the difference between the Browns being awesome and the Browns being awesome, and maybe Baker having a little dark horse MVP run to himself because, we can't vote for Mahomes every single year. Rodgers looking a little bit down. Brady, I think was your pick. I mean, that's certainly maybe your front runner at this point. But, if we can have these bad matchups and still get some reliance on Baker's arm, it'd be a lot of fun.
We've already got Patrick Mahomes MVP fatigue, and the guy's like 25. That's just like the stupidest thing that I feel like I've ever seen.
And he's only won one. He deserves another one.
Oh yeah, only won one. Okay, sure. He's just owned the league for 3 years.
We've been giving Defensive Player of the Year awards to people not named Aaron Donald inexplicably throughout his career.
Well, LeBron James didn't win the NBA MVP every year.
Right. This is the same argument here. So when I look at where this line has been, you mentioned being 12-point favorites, but on my sheet here, so don't yell at me if it's incorrect as of this second, but I believe it got up to 13.5 for Cleveland. 13.5, something like that. Moving from 12 even more in Cleveland's favor. I mean, is this the right way for this to move?
Yeah, George Shahuri and I do a PFF forecast right after the Sunday Night Football game. It was 11.5 then, and we advise people to take Cleveland, not so much because we think Cleveland's maybe the right side, but because it's going to get to a bigger number at close.
So if you liked it at that number, you might as well bet it then.
Yeah, you can buy it off later on. I think people are, the OBJ thing's a deal, but as Ian said, like there's that Stefanski-ness where they might just like cover up their passing game for a week and not show anybody anything. So, if they ever got to 14, I do think Houston would be a buy, but it hasn't gotten there yet.
We've got a big-time divisional matchup that I want to get to, but before we get to that, got to talk to the good people about our friends over at Pristine Auction. This is your go-to place for signed sports memorabilia. The coolest part about it is it's all auction style. So all of these jerseys, whatever it is that you're looking for, whatever team, whatever player, They start off at $1. You can get some big time steals from some great gear. If you use the promo code PFF when you sign up, you're going to get $10 off whatever the first auction is that you win. So it's not just the first auction that you participate in. They're not going to make you waste it. They're good people. That's how they do it. So if you win your first auction and you use the promo code PFF, you'll get $10 off. Go check it out. It's a really cool way to look at some sports memorabilia, see what's out there, and maybe get some for yourself over at pristineauction.com. The divisional matchup that I'm talking about, Saints-Panthers. Jameis is fixed, baby. It's over. Throw the FSU and the Bucs days out into the garbage. This is new Jameis. This is from here on out what we got last week, the multi-touchdown, fully efficient. This is Jameis for the rest of the time, right?
LASIK Winston. That's how he needs to change his name at this point, if that's what we're talking about.
Seeing the field better.
No, it's Flamus Winston, please.
No. See, that's the old Jameis. This is the new Jameis.
It's going to be fascinating to watch. He was excellent week one. He was efficient. He didn't have to do too much, and when he did, he was able to uncork the deep pass. But Jameis Winston has gone on runs like this before. I would say let's tap the brakes and let's wait and see if this is a long-term thing or if this is just the high end of Jameis that inevitably tumbles back down the mountain.
No, this is the low end of Jameis.
Fewest passing yards in NFL history for a 5-touchdown game. Great points win football games. I'm not trying to hate on it, but we do need to see a little bit more. That was awfully easy for portions of last week. The dime to Deontay, fantastic. The first touchdown in particular to Jawan Johnson was great ball placement. But let's see a game where Jameis isn't up by multiple scores and can rely on play action quite as heavily. Well, not that I don't want to annoy him.
And that was because they manhandled Green Bay in the trenches, as we talked about. We came up with Gooey last week, and that was very much the exact thing that they were. They rushed for more yards than they passed for, right? And Kamara was probably the closest thing that Kamara was to it's weird that Kamara's made all these Pro Bowls and we consider him a superstar. He's earned a second contract, and I don't think he even has as much as a 900-yard rushing season, right? Mm-hmm. This might be the first year where he gets a legitimate on-the-ground bell cow type, set of carries. And he was there last week, and it was really good for them.
That was actually what stuck out to me just in Fantasyland real quick. I mean, he played 73% of the snaps in a blowout. The last time we saw this was, I think, 2018 or 19 when Mark Ingram was suspended for the first 4 weeks, and Peyton said, you know what, screw it, Alvin, if you're, rested, you can go out there and play. And he was breaking fantasy football for that stretch. So only had, I think, 4 targets in that last one. Because of the game script, look the hell out if we see a game where these two teams are going back and forth.
If you own Kamara in fantasy, the fact that they cut Latavius Murray was probably one of the gifts because Latavius is a good running back, and I know Tony Jones is his backup, and they were they like him, but they're probably not going to trust him as much as they trusted Murray. And on the defensive side of the ball, we do see, we talked about last week, how they don't have the depth that they normally have, but they're still good at the starting lineup. That's going to be weakened a little bit without Davenport, without Marshawn Lattimore, who I believe is out with a broken hand, right? And so I get a little this is a matchup that's interesting. The Carolina Panthers did a really good job of pressuring Zach Wilson last week. Yeah. They also had, on the other side of the ball, the lowest rate of contested targets. They schemed guys open. Joe Brady is still a good coordinator. I think this is a sneaky one where my intuition says Saints. But you look at all the data, and the Panthers will be have a puncher's chance in this one.
You know who's definitively not gooey? Derek Brown. I remember reading that in a scouting report.
Look at the transition, baby. This is what it's all about.
Derek Brown is a beast. We saw that in week one. That guy was manhandling offensive linemen, 2 of them at a time when needed. The Saints, quietly, they have a really good offensive line, but that interior trio is not great. People keep thinking that their left guard is actually, a good top quality left guard. I've never quite understood that. The 3 interior guys last week had the lowest 3 pass blocking grades on the team. None of them have got good grades over an extended period of time. And now you've got to block the definitively not gooey Derek Brown. That could be a problem.
We've got Saints -3.5 as the line, and it hasn't moved a ton. I believe it stood right around that 3.5 line. Obviously, no Michael Thomas, no Marshawn Lattimore, no Traquan Smith. These guys are out, and you mentioned how much that's going to impact what they do with Kamara, how much they lean on Jameis Winston. But when it comes to the line there, Eric, is this the right spot? What do you think?
I think so. I think it's the right spot. If anything, I think New Orleans. New Orleans probably. They are favored. They should be favored. At some point, though, the buildup of never being at home might affect them.
No, that's actually a really good point. We talked about Kamara being an absolute fantasy stud. And that's a great way to talk about another segment that I want to bring up, and that is our Contraire En segment, bringing up the wordplay there, of course, with Ian's name. And he's going to give you all of he gave you the ad drops earlier in the show, but DFS, it's a different animal, right? And so now people gotta hear about what you can do with DFS lineups.
Yeah, if you want to go on DraftKings, try to go win yourself that $1 million. We got to try to beat hundreds of thousands of different lineups. And because of that, we do need to get what the kids are calling contrarian. So with that in mind, I think Jonathan Taylor at 7,200 sticks out as a running back worth getting behind. Everyone wants to pay up for the McCaffreys, for the Kamaras. But sneakily, in that game where the Seahawks controlled last week, it was only 2 Indianapolis running backs, Taylor and Nyheim Hines. Last year, we always had Jordan Wilkins, Marlon Mack very briefly, making that 3-headed committee. But almost similar to what we saw the Lions do. Swift and Williams returned top 5 value. Taylor and Hines were both getting involved in the passing game. I mean, Taylor, for him to have 24 combined carries and targets in a game that they lost by multiple scores, that's exactly what we want to see out of our fantasy backs. So obviously great talent. We saw all the upside last year. The Rams defense are great. I'm terrified of Aaron Donald. I'm sure everyone else at home is as well. They've allowed David Montgomery, Aaron Jones, back-to-back games, over 100 total yards and a score. Only so much that one player can do. And also, I just think that we need to look at this Steelers offense, as bad as the passing game was last week. I think that, in a much easier matchup against the Raiders, Chase Claypool is someone where, even though Deontay gets the targets, my goodness, guys, he mossed Tre'Davious White, hit a 25-yard reverse. He had 3 games last year with multiple touchdowns. I think it could be number 4 here this Sunday. And final point, Eric, Jacksonville. We want to play guys against them. Cortland Sutton, Javonte Williams, they had the usage we wanted last week. Melvin Gordon scored the 70-yard touchdown, but Javonte was out there just as often. Sutton accidentally caught, James Bradbury's shadow, great cornerback. Not so sure he's going to see that same sort of tight coverage this Sunday.
Yeah, good point on the Rams rushing defense. I think the fact that they're leaky there is a feature of their defense, not a bug. Mm-hmm. And so if you could play that in fantasy to your advantage, it might be a game. I'm not saying they're equal, but it might be a game where Aaron Donald has a close counterpart in Quentin Nelson.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Sam's skeptical.
I mean, no. Quentin Nelson is a great player, arguably the best guard in the NFL, one of the best linemen in the league, but Aaron Donald
but
is
besides
Aaron Donald.
that, he's trash.
Even that, all of that doesn't put him in the same world as Aaron Donald.
I am really looking forward to this matchup because, to Eric's point, this is one of the closest that we get, right? I mean,
what do you want to compare it to on Twitter? Godzilla versus King Kong?
Right, that's what I feel like it's going to be because I don't think it's, I'm with Eric a little bit.
But to Ian's point, that's going to lead, I think, Montgomery had a great game last week, very explosive, and I think he's not as talented of a back as Jonathan Taylor.
And the King Kong versus Godzilla thing, I think, is a perfect analogy because, as much as Quentin Nelson is this giant superhuman or super mutant gorilla thing, the other dude has a nuclear fire breath and just barbecues.
The Rams, and this is why rushing the passer and defensive line is a strong link unit and offensive line is a weak link unit. The Rams don't have to line him up over Quentin Nelson if they don't want to. That's the other aspect of it.
True.
That's important.
True. They're going to suck the fun out of this whole matchup and just put him on the other side. That's what's going to happen.
Offensive line goes as your weakest link. Interestingly for Indianapolis in this game, Eric Fisher, formerly the Chiefs starting left tackle, is probably going to play in this game.
Yeah.
He's a lot better than what they had last week. Braden Smith, I don't know what his status is, but I think that's the sneaky part of this matchup, which is that the Colts up front are not a joke. Yeah. And they become increasingly better this week. And the Rams are a very strong link unit on the defensive line. If they can find a way to neutralize Donald somehow, the fundamentals are there for Jonathan Taylor to have a big game.
You mentioned the Steelers, and you were talking about Chase Claypool a lot, which I want to talk about this Steelers-Raiders game because it's huge, right? Both of these teams are coming off these emotional wins, and I think that they've got a chance to make big statements, and fortunately it's by going through one of the other. But you mentioned Chase Claypool being a monster. Darren Waller on the other side. I mean, clearly they are going to run the passing game through this guy. I think Brian Edwards, we saw him come up as the game went on. They're probably going to hopefully hit Henry Ruggs a little bit more, but this whole Raiders offense is going to run through Darren.
Why has Darren Waller's agent not just said, hey, my client is a wide receiver at this point? Pull the Jimmy Graham card from 2013. He doesn't have the most egregious slot out wide splits as other guys, but everything about his production just tells us he's a number one receiver. And the way the salary is set up, I don't know, man, trying to make a few more millions in your pocket. 18 targets last week. He had 12 of those by halftime, and it was just all so designed to go his way. Only Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb had more first read targets. We keep wanting Bryan Edwards, Henry Ruggs, one of these other guys to become a thing. It might just be the Darren Waller show every single week.
And they are a thing in an interesting way, right? Like that when Waller gets all those targets, and by the way, if he didn't drop as many, Vegas might have won that game in regulation, right?
Dropped,
mix of that and overthrow.
Dropped inaccurate targets, the holding, they had a lot that went against. Like the Ravens weren't stopping Darren Waller at all in that game.
But it's an interesting thing of expectation, right? Because they took Ruggs in the first round and the first wide receiver taken, like we're all disappointed in him. But he had a big catch in that game, and he's a guy that, if you take away draft status, is a plus player on that offense, right?
Sure.
He takes safeties away.
He helps the identity, yeah.
He takes safeties away. He catches the ball when it's thrown to him. He's decent on runs. It's just that we're pissed off that he was the 11th overall pick or whatever, but kudos to Gruden for not necessarily force-feeding him targets. The guy to force-feed is Waller. The issue this week, the Steelers were top 5 last year in terms of limiting tight end production, right? And that's kind of fluky year to year, but it is something that'll be interesting to monitor because this is a good defense, but they are laying a lot of points. And to me, I think an offense that if they don't make as many mistakes as they made last week, they could very well hang with this team.
Speaking of the Steelers' defense being good, they were a bottom 5 team last week in terms of blitz percentage. Yeah. So how many times they brought more than 4. They were bottom 5. I believe they were 5th least in the NFL. They were number 1 in total pressures. Number 1. So they were only bringing 4, and they were still getting there every single time.
If the Raiders haven't spent all of this week trying to figure out how Alex Leatherwood is going to block TJ Watt, they're doing this game wrong. Like, Alex Leatherwood was absolutely annihilated and taken to school by Justin Houston, who at his best, at his peak, might have been the player that TJ Watt is right now, and he's nowhere near that right now. So, based off that evidence, TJ Watt could have an absolutely game-defining performance if they haven't figured out a way of stopping that happening.
And on the flip side, Raiders, they also got a lot of pressure. They also got a lot of pressure with 4. Max Crosby and the rest of that unit. I mean, Clelin Ferrell was a healthy scratch, and yet they're still getting home.
This, I think, is the way that the Raiders sort of hang in this game, is that, look, for all the problems they might have trying to stop TJ Watt, the other side of the ball, they were the number 1 graded defense in the NFL last week in terms of pressure. They had 28 of them as a group. Almost all of them were coming around the tackles. Pittsburgh's offensive line, it might not be as bad as it looked on paper heading into the year. It's still a question mark. It still has weak links.
Yeah, that's why, I know Ian said that Buffalo had a tougher defense. I think in the front 7, though, I think the Raiders are probably better. And kudos again to Gus Bradley, the Raiders, for taking a guy with another guy with high draft capital and not shoehorning him into the situation. The secondary is going to be kind of a mess, and the Steelers are going to throw quickly. If they tackle well, I think that they can limit it. If they're a disaster tackling, that's going to be the problem.
Yeah, I meant more secondary, specifically for Claypool, but definitely along the line of scrimmage. And how about some respect to Cam Hayward? I know we got to give TJ Watt all his shine, awesome. But our highest graded interior defender last week, and I believe only Crosby had more total pressures on the week. So a lot of good D linemen in this one.
Well, and they picked Melvin Ingram up. And it's like
steal.
All these teams are like the Ravens picked Justin Houston up $2.5 million, $4 million, I think maximum on that deal. Melvin Ingram not nearly as not as much either. And it's like some of these teams are struggling to get a pass rush. This guy's available until middle of the summer. It makes no sense, but he's a better player than Bud Dupree is.
Bud Dupree went off and got a monster contract in free agency, and everybody in Pittsburgh is like, oh, this is a disaster. The defense was different when Bud Dupree was out there last season. They sat around, did nothing, and then picked Melvin Ingram off the street for a fraction of that, and they got better.
Ingram had no sacks last year. Dupree had a ton. Teams pay for sacks, even though they should pay for pressures. Ingram is a very good pressure player. Bud Dupree, not a great pressure player, 2 last week in 29 pass rushes.
Josh Jacobs out in this game. Started as a 5.5-point line in favor of the Steelers. They're at home. got up to 6.5, so it went a little bit more towards the Steelers. Now I believe it's settled back down at 5.5. Is that the correct movement?
Yeah, I tried to grab some 6 this morning. It got down to 5.5 a little bit. So sometimes these are being set up early in the week. I do think the Raiders are the side, and I think the game that Pittsburgh wants to play is a close game. I think even if this game's like a 10-point game down the wire, Derek Carr is a very good, like, come in through the back door and score a touchdown at the end, lose by 3. So I think the only way you can't lay points with Big Ben at his current form. You just can't.
I still get worried about the West Coast team having the 1 p.m. Eastern kickoff, but just in terms of what we saw from the two teams, if
plus
we get
short rest too.
Yeah, but if we get what we saw from those two squads, then yeah, I think the Raiders are the play at plus points.
Let's move on to a divisional matchup here. Buffalo Bills, Miami Dolphins. This is two teams that are going to be really hungry for a win, to get this win, and it's against each other. So when we talk about division games, I know the cliche is, it's kind of like a game and a half, and it just means a lot more when you're going up against teams that you know really well. So with the Bills and the Dolphins, both teams looking to bounce back a little bit. Yeah. Where's your mind go first?
Big game for Buffalo. Obviously, they're in a hole, and they could get into deep hole if they lose to Miami. It's all about what kind of Josh Allen we get this week. The Steelers, there's 2 ways of causing Josh Allen problems. Either drop everybody into coverage, flood the zones, and make him, pick you apart, play by play, the way Tom Brady can do effortlessly, or put him under a ton of pressure. The Steelers were able to do both at the same time last week.
Right,
so it was just kryptonite for Josh Allen. He had no shot in that game. Miami doesn't have the kind of pass rush that he faced in week 1. On the other hand, they're going to play man coverage a lot. So it's a very interesting matchup for Allen because he's probably not going to be under pressure 41% of the time again. And he's going to know what he's looking at in terms of man coverage. It's just a case of, can you fit the ball in?
This is another crazy example of the results don't necessarily matter if you want to predict future things, right? Like Miami last week should have lost. Their defense should be worse in people's minds than it is, right? They give up 400 yards, but they got key turnovers. It was very much this exact same story as last year. But results have consequences, right? And if Buffalo probably should have won the game against Pittsburgh. There was a lot of fluky things, a blocked punt, a few drops on deep balls. But if the same thing plays out here, let's say the Dolphins get another fluky win, the Bills are extremely behind the 8 ball, even though they very well could be the better team and probably are, given the fact that they're a 3.5-point favorite. So it's very interesting where we look at these things and say, don't necessarily look at the results, look at the process. But the process has consequences, and they are immense here if Buffalo doesn't take care of business this week.
I would really be concerned about this Bills offense if they can't get back on track. Because the last time we saw these two plays, Miami's second game ago, 56 points with Josh Allen playing a half of the football game. So lost kind of in that performance against the Steelers. Great defensive effort from Pittsburgh, but the amount of big plays that got called back on holding penalties, which I know the hold lets the big play happen, but just a lot of missed chances. Emmanuel Sanders should have had a walk-in 50-yard score. Josh sailed it. Maybe these are new 2021 realities, but I would say out of all the teams that disappointed in week 1, I'm the least worried about the Bills.
Unders did a great job last week. If you bet under on all the games, you would have made a profit. The reason was there was about one more holding penalty per game than this time last year. And again, you don't think that's a lot, but if you take a 2nd and 20 on a drive, that drive's over, and that's a scoring drive that just doesn't happen.
How much does no Will Fuller matter here for this matchup? Because we learned that he's now away from the team for a personal issue, didn't really have an idea or a timetable of when he might be back. So how much might it hurt this matchup or just Miami in general if they're going to be out from him for a while?
They haven't had him yet, so we don't know what impact Will Fuller makes on this offense. Like, there have been these weird splits throughout his career of how much difference he makes when he's just on the field, but Miami hasn't had that luxury yet, so it's more about, can Tua stop spinning in a circle and throwing the ball to defenders?
It's fair. I mean, we do see those splits throughout the career, and they are awfully big. Deshaun Watson, 8.8 yards per attempt with Will Fuller, just 7.6 without. It's speed kills. We can kind of bring it down to that. We've seen the same things with Djax, Brandon Cooks, like just having that one guy on the outside. All of a sudden, all those intermediate crossers, Devontae Parker, are easier. The underneath hits to Jalen Waddle, he's got more space to run. So we haven't seen him there yet. I hope we see him there soon because I do think that will be the best version of it.
It shows how hard it is, though, when your offense is built around having that guy that can take the top off the defense when that guy can't stay healthy, right? We saw that in Philadelphia for years with Deshaun Jackson.
But you always say this now, we need 3 or 4 good receivers to have a great passing game.
Exactly. And I thought Parker actually looked really good last week. The problem is you need to have Fuller back for when Parker inevitably regresses, as he always does. And so right now they could probably ride Parker, as well as Waddle, but he needs to be back because you need multiple weapons there.
Bills, the road team. This one's in Miami, but the Bills are favored by 3.5, and it's moved actually to 3.
Yeah.
Now it's popped back up, I think, to 3.5 once again. But that was the movement. That's what we were looking for. Was that the right movement to see it go that way?
I think people are buying into the Bills rebounding here. They don't think the Bills can be that bad 2 consecutive weeks. They also look look at the Miami win. I think rightfully is extremely fluky. So that's why I think people might have bumped this up to 3.5 at times. There are some weather concerns in Miami. There's also the fact that in a week 2 game, they're going to make Buffalo probably wear their home jerseys, make them sit in the sun. There's a ton of stuff like that.
That's a thing. That is a thing. For somebody that covered Tampa football for a long time, they do that. They play the jersey matchup.
Yeah, and so I think under is actually maybe the best bet of this game. But those 2 games did not play under last year.
What did we think about Tua in that week 1 game?
I think the mistakes he made were massively concerning. I mean, my thing for him coming into the year is he doesn't make that many really bad mistakes, but there's no big plays either. And he needs to get more aggressive. He needs to show the big plays. Didn't really have those in week 1 and added the catastrophic mistake to his arsenal. That's moving in the wrong direction. That can't happen if he wants to be the starting quarterback for the Dolphins long term.
Now, it was against a Belichick defense. And as we've talked about with other guys, that's a tough matchup. But again, to now have another game where not the world's easiest matchup and you're still not 100%, not ideal.
But he's not a rookie anymore, and B, his head coach is a dude who came from that defense. So if anybody is able to mitigate the Bill Belichick versus young quarterback disaster, it should be Tua and Flores.
You would think. All right, last game that we're talking about, Baltimore Ravens, Kansas City Chiefs. This is a big-time matchup, right? 2 MVP quarterbacks going at it. And I want to start with Lamar Jackson. And any of you guys can chime in on this if you want, but how did Lamar look last week? Because I think there's a lot of questions around Lamar. People are probably unfairly waiting for him to fail. I think that's just, for whatever reason, a narrative with Lamar Jackson. But in a loss to the Las Vegas Raiders, how did you think that Lamar Jackson looked?
Would have helped if his defense got a stop after he brought them down the field to get the go-ahead field goal. I guess with Lamar, I just get so annoyed with the weekly Twitter outcry about him throwing the ball. When he does throw the ball well, it's just about time. When he doesn't, it's he's actually a running back. And you look at Josh Allen getting Stephon Diggs, Baker getting OBJ, whether or not he's been great.
Lamar got Sammy Watkins, so
of course.
As we know, dominates week 1. He did it again last week, but maybe I know some people believe Rashad Bateman can be that number 1, but he's just not healthy. And now when we have the offensive line problems, Lamar is asked to carry this offense more than just about any other quarterback in the league is asked to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think interestingly, last week he was able to support 2 good fantasy wide receivers in Watkins as well as Hollywood Brown. That sort of flies against narratives. It's just the issue with Lamar, I think, is when you look at the truly elite, and again, we're sort of wanting him to be a top 3 quarterback, 4 quarterback, when he's in that top 10, but I think what keeps him out of that elite list is when you need a basket, he's just not able to sometimes be as accurate as he should be. You have balls on different hips and all that kind of stuff, and again, against an offense that was humming as well as the Raiders, you can't make those mistakes. And I think that's what people who I think are right, most of the opinion on Lamar should be positive. But in that gap between him and, let's say, the truly elite, that's the area where I think people are rightly looking at his game and saying, what's the problem?
This was a really unfortunate game for the narrative for Lamar Jackson. Because he looked panicked, he looked inaccurate, he didn't look great in this game. On the other hand, his left tackle gave up so many pressures that they said, take a seat, Ronnie, you're not playing this week. His right tackle gave up even more pressures than that. So the dude was just getting buried every single play. Everything that happened was because Lamar Jackson was able to make something out of nothing. We saw in the Super Bowl that there is a threshold at which point your quarterback, no matter how good he is, has no prayer. And I think this was above that threshold for Lamar Jackson, and he still had them in contention right up until he fumbled it away. So, look, I think Lamar is a better quarterback than the narrative, but last week really didn't help, and this week might not either.
The Ravens, who are probably the sharpest team in all of football, might have lost that game because they messed up the end of game situation. I mean, they had a chance for that field goal. right? Instead of, sort of making plays that were sort of close to first down plays, they kind of ran traditional run plays, 1, 2, 3, kick a field goal, and they gave the Raiders a chance with 37 seconds left. By the way, Raiders were 7.7% chance to win that game. So at one point, the Ravens had a 92% chance to win that game. And the Raiders increased their probability of making the playoffs by 15% with that drive.
Wow.
So if people say these games don't matter, they freaking matter. And that's why people love the NFL. The Ravens kind of bungled that end of the game stuff. And the reason why the Ravens are such a good bet all the time is because you can almost always bake in, they're going to go for the right fourth downs. They're going to maneuver the clock properly. They're going to take every dollar bill that's on the ground and pick it up. And that last week, they kind of failed at that. And that was super surprising. And you wonder if that doesn't cause them to go on tilt a little bit in this game against the Chiefs.
I also think their big concern is now, like we're used to the Ravens having a great defense across the board. Now, it wasn't great against the Raiders. They allowed Darren Waller just run free in the secondary all day long. We said before, nothing the Ravens did was slowing down Darren Waller. Like, Darren Waller was slowing down Darren Waller, and Derek Carr was slowing down Darren Waller, but the Ravens weren't. Now Travis Kelce rolls in there, who's averaged 80-plus yards the last couple of times he's faced the Ravens. And even if you decide, all right, we're going to bracket Travis Kelce every single play, we're going to take him away, then, oh, by the way, Tyreek Hill is one-on-one against a fourth-string corner, 60 yards downfield for a touchdown. Like, all of a sudden, and you make it worse because you zero blitz 13 times in a game. So all of a sudden, the Baltimore Ravens defense
the Ravens are a Marlon Humphrey
door.
Injury away from being a bottom 10 defense.
Like catastrophic.
Yeah, like,
they're two identities, like a lot of aggressive secondary play, right? With whatever they want to do up front, they've got a lot of secondary play or aggressive secondary play, and then running. They're down all of their running backs and down Marcus Peters.
And Jimmy Smith didn't play last week, and they looked actually pretty good in the first half of that game. The Raiders aided it a little bit, but I think the issue is when you lack depth over the course of that game and you try to play that kind of defense, it's going to peter out as the game goes on. They have to play more zone coverage in this game. They cannot do.
That's not their identity, though. I don't think.
You can't. Like, at some point, your identity is just a losing ticket. You can't just run that system.
And even when they were healthy with that identity, Mahomes has been the one exception, just absolutely shelling them.
They zero blitzed 13 times against the Raiders. The Colts zero blitzed less than that last season, the entire year. You can't. And Patrick Mahomes carves up the blitz more than any other quarterback in the NFL. If they do that this week, it is just handing the Chiefs points.
Well, the Ravens are getting 3.5. So they're getting 3.5 points here. It has not really moved at all whatsoever. So Vegas seems very comfortable with this number for the Ravens.
Yeah, all the movement has been at pre-flop time. Like, so the Chiefs were going to be favored in every game this season except for one. They were a pick'em against the Ravens when everything opened up. It got out to 2.5 after Sunday night's game. George Shahuri and I on the PFF forecast, which is out every single Sunday night at about midnight Eastern, we took Kansas City minus 2.5. It moved all the way up to 4.5, and now it's 3.5. I do think folks who have laid it heavy with Kansas City throughout this time have bought back a little bit on Baltimore, and sort of in the event that it's a 3-point game, they win everything. But right now at 3.5, I think that's probably the right number. Interestingly, last year in Week 3, when the Ravens hosted Kansas City, they were 3.5-point favorites. So the difference between these two teams has magnified by 7 points over the course of the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, I just don't know who on Baltimore is going to cover either Tyreek or Kelce. I mean, I thought the Eli Peyton stream, the funniest part of that entire thing was Travis Kelce not even knowing that the Ravens were next on the schedule, because who cares? They're putting up huge points and numbers on everyone save for that fantastic Tampa performance.
How great was that broadcast?
Loved it.
And he's just making up his routes anyway. It doesn't matter who he's trying to cover.
That's how I feel. I feel like that's the Chiefs most of the time with Hill and Kelce. It's essentially like, here's the route you're going to run for the first 2 seconds. But other than that, just get open.
What Kelce said is actually really smart, because it wasn't just, hey, we're playing backyard football and going out there making up whatever. Like, the quote that came from it was I give Mahomes the eyes and he knows. But the bit right before that was when he was talking about, look, I can basically run wherever I want as long as I'm not fouling up somebody else's route. So he knows where everybody else is going, and as long as he's not in the same space screwing up the play, it works.
That's an underrated part of that quote, which is that tight ends are the smartest people on the football field except for quarterbacks.
And former quarterback tight ends.
Yeah. I mean, because the issue is not what like a lot of positions in football are like, your responsibility. O-line, tight end, it's like you have to know everybody's. And like and to not mess up the routes you're talking about is a big deal. And other players on that team being fine about that's why they've had issues with McCole Hardman, because other players not following up what Kelsey's doing is also important. That to me is one of the flaws in Kansas City, and maybe one that Baltimore kind of gets a pass here with their secondary issues, is the Chiefs after Kelsey and Hill. Not again after after two Hall of Fame players.
Right.
After Kelsey and Hill, they're weak, and so Baltimore's a very smart team. If any team could figure out sort of how to make basically make this a McCole Hardman game, maybe they make it a game they can win.
I feel like everybody wants that, though, right? Every single team goes into every single week against the Chiefs going, let's have somebody else beat us. And you know what happens? Those guys beat them anyway.
And to be fair, in the Super Bowl run, Sammy Watkins put together maybe his 2 or 3 best games in a row.
The biggest difference between the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl in 19 and losing it in 20 was the fact that they had a third receiving option, right? Like that, it did not happen.
Sammy Watkins. That's who decides Super Bowls.
JD Drew of
the key,
football.
the key to everything. Guys, if you like a lot of the information that you are hearing on this show with all this conversation, you can see all this data yourself. You can go over to PFF.com, and if you don't have a subscription, there's 2 different subscription models, an Edge and an Elite. You can see exactly what comes with both, one more expensive than the other, so you can work it to your budget the way that you want to. But, of course, the more you pay for, the more information you get. You also get fantasy football tools, fantasy football draft guide, which if you sign up for a year, you'll be able to get that next time fantasy football drafts roll around. You'll get the NFL draft guide as well, all sorts of stuff. But if you go to that Elite membership, you get all of the premium stats, all of the just down to the detail breakdowns of where guys are lining up, how they are against certain coverages, what routes they're running, what looks they have, everything. All that is over at PFF.com. All right, so back by popular demand, we have on with us now Darius Butler, and we had some heated back and forth with the Dare I Say segment last week. Darius, after taking a look at everything that happened in week 1, how you feeling about the NFL action? How you feeling about your priors, your storylines, all your takes?
I mean, I feel like I was pretty much right on point, man. I heard some crazy takes like Zeke. We had some Zeke takes. We had some Fitzpatrick takes. I know he got hurt. I told you guys Jalen Hurts was most likely the second best quarterback in that division. I look right there. I expect Justin Herbert to go out and rip it up today. So he'll probably be the MVP these next 2 years or so. So, I mean, just right, man. I feel right. It feels good to be right. I got my PFF swag on today. So
he's got it on. He's representing there. How did you feel about your bold take, Eric? Your just bold take about the Jets being competitive?
I mean, they covered last week, then they're not. I mean, at least if you got it at 5.5, they covered. And they placed an NFC team. So, the true test starts today as 6-point underdogs.
Those are the only terms.
I have to give you crap because just competitive. Like, what is competitive? It's not even a record. You weren't even like playing.
Those are the only terms Derek deals in is the spread.
Right.
They covered. Therefore,
if they win, he's going to say, "Oh yeah, see, they were competitive." And if they lose, he's going to be like, "No, they were still competitive."
Well, if they got blown, I mean, they had a 16-point deficit. They came back. They made it.
They fought. They fought. They did compete. They took on the personality of their head coach. But I don't see it getting any better, especially today. Sam Darnold saw ghosts. No telling what Zach's going to see today, especially with the big ticket out of there.
How do you feel, Sam? How do you feel about the Washington pick now?
Well, the good thing is that moving from Fitzpatrick to Taylor Heineke doesn't appear to be any different whatsoever. There's just a younger version of Fitzpatrick.
Still going strong.
It's still alive.
Still going strong.
They won.
Yeah, their defense is still overrated. Their coach still kicks it on 4th downs. It's the same team. Yeah, nothing's changed.
They came out at Thursday night. They got to win. That's all I need.
Yeah, for everybody who doesn't remember from last week, Sam had Washington cruising. Cruising was the word, right?
Cruising
to the division title. I just want to say, Darius, before we move on to what we're talking about this week, I said that the Packers might not win a single playoff game.
That's still crazy. Week 1, there's going to be a lot of teams that came out and looked terrible, that'll look like completely different teams this week. I think the Packers will be one of them. The Titans, I think, will come out and look much better this week than they looked week 1. It's kind of week 0 for a lot of guys. So I wouldn't jump too high on that high horse yet. It's still A-Rod we talking about. I think they bounce back.
The only thing that's for sure about last week was that Zeke is every bit as bad as he looked against the
Come
Bucs.
on,
We have not
man.
seen a single new snap since we
Come
talked about
on,
this
man.
last week. but
That's
still
true.
just
That's
getting
true. We have not
absolutely
seen new
washed.
Zeke action. Darius, before we get into this segment, I know you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned Herbert there. You mentioned a couple other guys. But any other big overlying takeaways that you had from that first week of action?
I mean, I really liked how Jameis and the New Orleans Saints look. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see how they look this week. Obviously, with all those offensive coaches out with the COVID issues that they have going on. So the responsibilities will be split amongst the other guys. The good thing is Sean Payton is an offensive head coach, but it's a lot of things that kind of go into games, substitutions and guys that have to handle different things on the sideline. So that'll be interesting in New Orleans. Joe Burrow surprised me up there in Cincy. He looked really good. Looked like he's going to pick up right where he left off his rookie year. It was a lot of good storylines. So I'm interested in catching up and seeing this week.
All right. So Darius has a lot of expertise, as we know, but I feel like the area that he knows better than anything else is DB play, right? And there's a lot of really great DB wide receiver matchups coming up this week. So what we wanted to do this week, we're not going to do, dare I say, every single week. I think that we're probably going to run ourselves into the ground if we have takes as hot as Eric's was last week. So we didn't want to do that every single week. So instead, what we're going to do here today is we're going to talk about some of the biggest DB wide receiver matchups. And I'm glad that you mentioned Joe Burrow because that's one that I really want to talk about. Bengals, Bears this week. We've got Higgins, Boyd, Chase from the Bengals. We've got Christian, Builder, and Johnson from the Chicago Bears. And so, DB, what's your thoughts to that right off the bat?
Yeah, I mean, the only DB I like in that matchup is Johnson, Jalen Johnson. He's a young stud in that back in that secondary with the Bears. The rest of those guys, I mean, they looked terrible last week on prime time. And the Bears have been known over the years to try out a good defense. And that secondary looked all over the place. They looked lost. You saw the screenshot with Cooper Kupp 20 yards behind the entire defense. So I expect some changes personnel-wise from those guys who probably shouldn't even been starting anyway, especially at that nickel position. So I'm giving the Bengals receivers the big edge here with Joe Burrow, quarterback. You got Jamar Chase out there, Boyd, and Higgins, man. So I'm giving them the big edge this week over those Bears DBs.
Darius, this game opened at Cincinnati getting about a field goal and a half, like 3.5.
Shocked me.
Now down to 1.5. I don't understand, after you've moved through 3, should the Bengals just be favored in this game? Is the only leak the idea that, we like when Baker played his first Thursday night game, it was like the Jets were, favored in that game. They were playing extremely well. You put Baker in, the whole thing blows up. Is this the only reason why the Bears are favored here is A, they're at home, and there's always that risk in the Andy Dalton revenge game that the Bears decide, look, it's not going to happen. We're going to put Fields in because Darius, I feel like the only way the Bengals don't win this game is if Justin Fields plays.
I'm with you. And I was honestly shocked when I first saw, I think the first line I saw was 2.5, and I had to double check and make sure it was on the right side. So I jumped on that as soon as I could with the Bengals. And I can't even, after seeing them on Sunday Night Football, I don't understand why they are the favorites in this game. I wouldn't be shocked if by kickoff maybe that changes, but I mean, it's crazy, but I'm hammered. I felt bad for even saying this is my dog of the day because this is, I mean, now we could look crazy. Any dog could have a revenge game. The only chance that they have, I see, outside of Justin Fields playing is David Montgomery having a week like he had last week. And that offensive line and that running game controlling the ball. And then the defense maybe get lucky and create a couple turnovers. But outside of that, man, I can see the Bengals. Bengals, I feel like, beat a better Vikings team last week in overtime than this Bears team. So I'm still surprised at this line.
Yeah, I mean, the Bengals held Dalvin Cook to 20 carries for just a little over 60 yards.
That was great, yeah.
That was a very good performance by them. I think sneakily, Darius, like their defense actually has not only some decent football players, but some depth, right? Like if you look at that secondary, none of the players, aside from Jesse Bates, are amazing. But they don't have anybody in that secondary who's completely terrible either, which I think is helpful, especially against a Bears team that – it has to get lucky, I think, to make good plays offensively.
And Darius mentioned Jamar Chase, and I want to get your thoughts on Chase because we heard throughout the preseason, I mean, he wasn't able to catch anything. Then he says a line about not being able to see because there's no lines on the ball. And then all of a sudden it comes out and he looks like Jamar Chase, right? I mean, he looks like the guy that we thought he was going to be coming into the NFL. So, I mean, what were your week 1 takeaways from Chase?
I mean, we knew he was a special talent. Guy doesn't sit out a season and go top 5 for no reason. At the time, I thought they should have went Sewell. But, I mean, you got another weapon for Burrow who he's obviously super comfortable with. And they literally look like they picked up right where they left off at LSU. He had some struggles in the preseason. But like I said, he missed a lot of football, real live action at the football. And I think his comments were obviously blown out of proportion. That's what the media did. I guess I'm part of the media now. That's what we do. So they misconstrued his comments. But, I mean, Jamar Chase is going to be fine. He's going to be special. He should be wide receiver 1. But they got 2 other guys, I don't even want to say behind Chase. That could be a matchup problem every week for the DBs out here.
Yeah, he's got the PFF logo on now. So like you are officially part of the media. Now you guys we when you talk about the media, you gotta say we got to go on the next game because it's something that Darius mentioned Justin Herbert, and he said that he thought that Justin Herbert was on his way to being a league MVP soon. Justin Herbert gets Dak Prescott, right? It's another guy who a lot of people love, have a lot of high hopes for, could be a potential MVP guy as well. That Cowboys DB group of Jordan Lewis, Anthony Brown, and Trayvon Diggs, they're going up against Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Darius, I mean, I didn't even need to name 3 guys for the Chargers. They're going to get more guys involved, but Williams and Allen, it's hard to find a better duo than those 2 guys.
It's hard to find a better duo. I mean, Keenan Allen, he not only is he so good, but he's so smart. And a big thing about wide receivers and quarterbacks is being on the same page, kind of being on that same umbilical cord and knowing, okay, this is the coverage. I know it's drawn up for you to go and sit here, but this is the opening. I'm going to hit you here. And Herbert and Allen look like they're already on that page. He loves the 50-50 balls with Mike Williams. I can see that being a matchup problem all day for the Cowboys, especially with DeMarcus Lawrence out. I am interested to see how Michael Parsons changes his game on the edge because I honestly, once he goes there full time on the edge, I don't see him going back. Honestly, but as far as these wide receivers and DBs go, I got to give the edge to the Chargers wide receivers because of their phenomenal quarterback back there in the center.
The most amazing thing about Keenan Allen to me is that he is such a good route runner that the only DB I've seen consistently able to cover him is Derwin James in training camp. Like, there's no cornerback that's ever been able to go one-on-one with Keenan Allen and actually match his route running skills. The only guy that's ever come close is Derwin on those one-on-one reps.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's good. I love the volume equation of this too, because Mike Williams, we've seen the guy have an 11 touchdown season. He's gone over 1,000 yards. He's never had 100 targets in a single season yet. Week 1, Austin Eckler got goose-egged on the target sheet. Why? Because they flowed so much through Keenan and Mike for the first time ever. One of my favorite cool PFF stats we have behind the screen, first read targets. And I think they show you what the offense is trying to do, first and foremost. Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, 2 of only 8 guys to have double-digit first read targets last week.
Interestingly, though, the Chargers were the second highest team in the NFL last week in throwing to contested players. The only team that was worse was Tennessee, and I think we all agree that Tennessee just wasn't running good offense, not getting guys open. I do wonder, I don't think it's going to be an issue this week, much like the Packers, when, your offense funnels through one guy. Mike Williams, he's a good player when he's healthy, but that's not a reliable thing. Jared Cook's not a good tight end anymore. I wonder about when they face a team that actually has a good secondary, can they focus? If they focus enough on Keenan Allen, will Justin Herbert have options B, C, and D? In the way that Tampa Bay, would in a big matchup.
But it feels like you're
It feels Justin Herbert, a quarterback like that, they create other options. He's an option to take off, and when you have a guy who can buy that extra half a second, Keenan Allen's already darn near impossible to stop and guard. So you have a quarterback can find him in his space and create that extra time to get him. I mean, it's tough to do. Where he's going on the money downs in the critical situations. The guy still can't stop him. Mike Williams, he's not a slouch. So he's not a guy that you're just comfortable leaving cornerback 2 on an island with all day. So I see that offense just, being bigger and bigger problems as the season goes on.
What happens when something like Brian Bulaga goes on IR? This is the same. This is still the Chargers. This is still a team.
You're saying cursed
that gets snake bitten by injuries, gets snake bitten by random stuff. Aaron Rodgers last season in the NFC title game, when you had a good defense with multiple defensive backs and you had Bakhtiari injured, Rodgers, and Herbert are at least on the same tier. It made the offense pat the ball a little bit, made it a lot harder on them. I don't see that happening in this game, right? We're talking about week 2. The Cowboys are not making anything happen on defense. But I think about when you look at the Chargers ceiling, I do think a third option has to step up. And that's a problem that a lot of teams have, including the team that they're competing with in the AFC West, the Kansas City Chiefs.
Next matchup I want to talk about is with the Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs. This is a massive game that's going on, but in terms of DBs versus wide receivers, yes, Sammy Watkins and Marquise Brown is the two main guys outside of Mark Andrews from the wide receiver standpoint in the Ravens, and they're going up against Travarius Ward, Ladarius Sneed, and Mike Hughes from the Chiefs. Darius, where's this leaning? I know that when you think about the Ravens, you don't exactly think about passing first, but Lamar's got to get the ball down the field at some point. That's how you're going to win games, even with as good as he is on his legs. So is this matchup juicy enough for the Ravens to be an advantage, or do you think the Chiefs DBs have a chance in this one?
I mean, the Ravens could have possibly had an advantage if they had Bateman. You know, obviously Bateman's out for a while, and he was a rookie that I was really, really high on coming out. I think he'll ultimately be their wide receiver one. Hollywood played good last week. Played good last week against the Raiders. So did Sammy. Sammy Watkins made some big-time catches. But the Chiefs, with those corners you mentioned.
Wearing the 5 now. He's wearing the single digits. So, that's why he's playing good again.
He's back. He's back. But I'm taking the Chiefs on this. I'm giving the Chiefs the edge on this one, especially with the Honey Badger being thrown back in the fold. So he's always going to be in the right spot. This game, I see the Chiefs winning and covering this game. But if you're just looking at the DBs and the wide receiver matchups here, I'm definitely going Chiefs DBs easy on this one. I'm going to go easy.
What do we think about how the Chiefs play their secondary? Yeah. Like the whole thought process around the guys that they have there, because it's different than it is against the rest of the league.
Yeah, last season, Kansas City was the only team in the NFL that allowed fewer yards to wide receivers was the Los Angeles Rams. And the Los Angeles Rams did it with more like talent. Kansas City, I mean, when you look at this, Ward's a 7th round pick-ish, right? Undrafted guy. Mike Hughes was a 1st round pick, but they got him for a 6th round pick in a trade.
Right.
Ladarius Sneed's a 4th round pick, probably the best of the bunch.
I like Sneed a lot.
Yeah,
he was good last year. He was
right?
great.
But a lot of that is the scheme that Spagnuolo runs, and he sort of limits the issues that come up in the secondary. But getting Matthew back to me is a huge boost. Last week, their interior defenders, so both safeties and the slot corner Sneed, combined for 9 missed tackles. Daniel Sorensen had 5. I think having Matthew there makes everybody just a little bit more comfortable, and more comfortable you are, the less mistakes you make. And I think that's a huge deal. And that was one of the reasons why the Browns were so effective offensively last week.
So I want to get Darius's take on this, because he's obviously been out there. He's had the helmet on. And when you bring up, I asked you about these corners, and one of the first things you bring up is Tyrann Mathieu. So somebody who's been in that situation, what does having a guy like that really mean to, say, you as a player, as a corner, when he's behind you?
It's everything. Obviously, knowing him and knowing what he brings to a team, just the communication factor, the calming effect, almost like a John Johnson, what he did with the Rams. He brought up the Rams last year. He was a huge part of their success. And the same with Ty Matthew. It's the one thing as a player, just trying to figure out, what are we doing in this alignment? What if they motion? What if they shift? A guy like 32's out there, he's going to bring a calming effect. Hey, you're there. Hey, lock it. I got you help on the inside here. Take away the outside. Hey, alert this angle route. So all those little things that happen before snaps take place that can make those corners more and more comfortable with their role, and they can just lock in and, attack that role and attack that player. It makes a huge difference on the defense, especially with young players.
All right, time to go back to his old team. Time to go back to the Patriots. I see you put the Patriots helmet up there over his shoulder this week.
You already know which way I'm going on this one.
That's the last one we got to talk about. Jalen Mills, Michael Carter, and Brandon Eccles versus Corey Davis, Jacoby Myers, and Nelson Aguilar. So this is the Pats over the Jets wide receivers. Who you got in this matchup?
Oh, no. You see, you flipped it. I'm on the Pats DBs over the Jets wide receivers.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm right there with you. But yeah, I'm going to pass DBs. I mean, part of the reason I start with the quarterback, Zach Wilson, rookie quarterback. We know the history of rookie quarterbacks against a Bill Belichick coach defense. It's going to be a lot of tight windows. They're going to play press man coverage. They're going to know exactly where their help is with Devin McCourty. They're going to know the alignments on the shifts and the stacks and the motions. I'm sure they'll try to get LaFleur, try to get creative and try to create some separation with these receivers. But it's going to be a tough go. And then with the offensive line banged up, I'm sure they'll kind of orchestrate some pressure up front to try to get that ball out quick. But it's going to be a fun matchup. I think the Patriots DBs dominate this matchup.
Darius, what is your concern with that pass rush for the Pats, which is always sort of more than the sum of the parts, right? It's never really one dominant player up front. Yep. They got Jude on there. But this might be a lucky break for the Jets not having Becton and facing a team that doesn't have a Khalil Mack of the world, or even like a Brian Burns, like we saw last week. Does that affect anything you're thinking about in this game, or do you have ultimate faith in Belichick to say, look, it's going to make life hard on the rookie? Because we saw when he had time to throw last week, I mean, he has an absolute hose. And,
he looked great late.
He can throw people, open downfield and stuff like that. Is that a worry that you have?
No, because I think Belichick will find a way to try to manufacture some pressure. So it's not like you said, I'm just not like a ass kicker out there as a pass rusher, but you got guys, you're going to move them around. I'm sure you'll see some zero looks like you saw last year with Sam Darnold. And that kind of confuses quarterbacks. It kind of confuses the pass pro. Maybe you don't know where that protection is coming. And then when you got tight coverage on the back end, or maybe they'll make it look tight and then switch up and go to a cover 2 drop and just completely confuse the young quarterback. The talent with Wilson is unquestioned. But when you're getting things thrown at you left and right, scheme-wise, you don't know who's coming, who's blitzing, who's dropping. That kind of confusion just caused that little bit of hesitation where those DBs and those linebackers can take advantage.
Was that really the main takeaway for you when it came to Zach Wilson last week? I mean, obviously it's his first game. It's his first live action at regular season speed. Were you disappointed? Were you encouraged? Was it about what you thought it would be with Wilson after that game?
I've been kind of tough on Wilson, I guess, but I was encouraged. I was encouraged. He showed a lot more. He showed toughness. I saw him out there probably his second quarter. His sleeve was already ripped up, and he was just out there still, slinging it. He looked better as the game went on. So I was definitely, if I'm a Jets fan, I'm definitely encouraged by what I saw. It's going to be some bumps and roads. It's a tough league to play in, especially when you're making the jump that he made. So I was definitely encouraged by Zach Wilson's performance last week, and I think he'll continue to get better. It's just when you're facing the Patriots. And Mac, on the other side, Mac Jones, he looked completely in control of this offense against a very, very tough and talented Dolphins defense, who's obviously well coached with Brian Flores. He's beat up on rookie quarterbacks a lot too. So I was very impressed with Mac Jones on the other side of that. So I'll be interested in watching both of these rookie quarterbacks today.
How much the discourse has grown. Mac Jones loses week 1. They only score 16 points. But I think all of us are sort of woke to the idea of actually, no, this looked actually really good. It was some noisy stuff. And to your point, Darius, about Zach Wilson, there was that blitz on the last touchdown drive. I mean, he took a massive hit. And then comes up the next time, boom, boom, touchdown. And it's that was something you frankly didn't see from his predecessor in Sam Darnold. You just did not see bouncing back.
Right.
Yeah, some mental toughness there.
If you guys love this wide receiver DB talk, of course, you can find it over at PFF.com. We've got all of the grades, all of the previews, everything. You can see exactly what those matchups are there. Darius, before we get you out of here, final thoughts heading into this week's slate of games. Is there a game or a matchup or anything that you're really, really looking forward to when it comes to this Sunday slate?
I mean, the Chiefs-Ravens game, it's always exciting. Two young MVP quarterbacks that'll be going at it. So I'm definitely excited about that one. And the game we just talked about, the Patriots-Jets, just because, the narrative behind these young rookie quarterbacks, the more we see them, the more we can kind of jump and overreact to them. So I'm excited about that. It's a lot of games. This week too, man. I'll be on the couch all day watching as many games as possible. So I'll be locked in.
That's how it's done. Fellas, any final thoughts before we get out of here? Sam, game you're looking forward to most?
I think it has to be that Kansas City-Baltimore one. I think it's a huge game for Baltimore because of the way week 1 went, because of all of the injuries, everything they're dealing with. I think it's a big game for them to just try and hang with Kansas City.
Cowboys Chargers. Let's say 70, 80 total points for this one. I want out there. That right now, that game total is at 55.5. Can't set it high enough. I'm taking the overall.
Okay, all right.
I think this one we didn't talk about because the wide receivers aren't necessarily going to factor in as much as other games. But the Las Vegas Raiders going to Pittsburgh as 6-point underdogs. I think that's going to be a game that's going to determine a lot in the AFC.
Who covers in that game? I got the Raiders covering in that one.
Raiders.
Okay.
It's really hard to be that bad when you have a quarterback like Derek Carr, a play caller like John Gruden, and a weapon like Darren Waller in the passing game. It's hard to be bad.
And those are two teams that are, coming off emotional highs off of the week 1, right? I mean, we didn't exactly think either of those teams are going to win. So who's going to turn it into 2-0, right? All right.
Well, I did. So you didn't read my PFF article last week. I picked the Steelers to cover. You know what I mean? Come on, man. But those are two great fan bases. The Steelers Nation and Raiders, like those are, if you've been around the game and those are probably two of the most passionate fan bases. So I'm excited about that. But one more game I got to ask you about before I get out of here. This San Francisco Philly game. Like, what do you guys work? Because I went with Philly this week. I saw a lot of people, a lot of tickets, a lot of monies on Philly this week. Where you guys stand on that game?
I want to see how Hartitz looks. He had 3.6 yard average target depth. Atlanta made everything so easy for him last week, and good. It should be easier than that offense was last year. I think it could be a little bit harder against Nick Bosa and company. So let's see if the encore is as good as it did.
I can't wait for Garoppolo and Hurts to compete for who has the lowest average depth target.
Jeez. Can you just – we waited so long for NFL football. Can you just give us something to be happy about?
The Yak Bowl. And hopefully – I mean, going into last week, we all thought Philly was just going to make us all yak. But instead, like, they're actually a decent team. So I'll lay the points to San Francisco, but I'm not happy about it.
I think Ian, this is, let's see if last week was just a product of how bad Atlanta is, or if Philadelphia is actually a lot better than people gave him credit for. If Jalen Hurts has taken the kind of leap that he looked like he did last week, like they might be, I mean, not championship caliber, but they're for real in terms of being a competitive team, Eric.
And to be fair, Jalen Hurts, for as much as he wasn't pushing it down the field consistently or a lot, like he looked a lot kind of like I thought he was at Oklahoma. He had a couple of really nice throws, but they just didn't ask on him. And Hurts was able to take over.
Fred Warner is one of the best linebackers in the NFL at not biting at nonsense. And as good as Deion Jones,
very true.
Great way to put it.
As good as Deion Jones is, I think he's a tier below. And so some of the stuff that worked against Atlanta, both because they were soft up front on both sides of the ball, is also not going to work against the Niners because of how good Fred Warner is.
All right, there we go. All right, everybody. For Darius Butler, for everybody at this table, thank you so much for watching. Go fix those fantasy lineups. You got a couple of minutes left before the games get kicked off. We'll see you guys next week.